Okay, so hello, my name is Dr Claire Hardaker, and I'm a lecturer in corpus linguistics here at Lancaster University. One of the things that I research in particular here is online deception, aggression and manipulation. A lot of my research has looked into the behaviour of trolling in particular. So one of the questions I keep getting asked is, what on earth made you look into trolling? We have to go back a little bit. I'll try and keep it really brief, but basically when I was probably about 8, 9, 10, I was crazy about horses, but my parents couldn't afford one. There was no chance we were going to get one. So essentially what happened was I was kind of at school by myself. I was the only person who was really interested in horses, and then our school got a computer in 1997. It was such a big deal, it was actually put in the local newspapers. They took a photograph of it and everything. And then the year after, they actually installed the internet on that computer. Because it was in the library and because I was quite a bookish kind of kid, it basically became my computer, my internet. So from 98, Yahoo clubs also appeared, and there was a horse group which I joined, which I'm actually still a member of now, the sort of the new version of it. And basically I got talking to lots of horse people, and it was wonderful, and we had a really great time. But what would happen is every now and again, we'd all be minding our own business, having a great deal of fun, and then someone would join the group and post something really horrific, something really daft like, I set horses on fire, or my horse is being really badly behaved, I'm hitting in the head with a hammer. Is this going to work? Should I do something differently? The group would get really upset, everyone would get very angry, people would go chasing this person, trying to track them down, trying to report them to the police. And for a long time, we didn't really kind of twig, if you like. We didn't think that maybe there was something else going on. It took us a really long time to realise what is now incredibly obvious, that probably these people were just posting daft things to get a reaction. It also took us ages to realise that a lot of the time these were the same people just using different IDs, and so they would join, they would post one horrific thing, they would sort of sit back and watch the chaos, and then they would vanish and they would come back in a few months' time with a different ID and do the same thing. So finally, I think it was when a new member joined and actually said, why do you guys respond? These are trolls. And this was about the first time we came across this term. And then when you move forward several years later on, I go to university and I found out about this thing called impoliteness, and I found out about computer-mediated communication, and sort of the light bulb came on. Why not study this behaviour that I'd been seeing for years online already? So come forward to the future, I'm now sort of an awkward mix between a forensic linguist and a corpus linguist. So corpus linguistics, I love to look at massive amounts of data. Forensic linguistics, I like to look at criminal behaviour through language. So when I started my PhD, I basically decided I was going to look at trolling, and that was in 2007. And the interesting thing at the time when that happened was a lot of people were, shall we say, sceptical. They kind of wondered why I was looking at this very strange behaviour that a lot of people hadn't heard of. They thought I was spending years just playing on the internet. So I also looked at behaviours like flaming, cyberbullying, cyber harassment, because to understand what trolling is, you have to understand what the other behaviours that often get sort of, the same names get used to mean different behaviours, or different names get used to mean the same behaviour. So you also have to define these other behaviours as well. So some of the things I'm going to talk about is research that I've just done recently, and then I'm going to talk about the ESRC project that we've just successfully been granted in the CAS department. So the first thing that I tried to tackle, particularly in my PhD and then in my later research, was what the word trolling even means, because when we try and look at it in the data, we find that there is a whole rainbow of different meanings. So I'll talk about that in a moment. And the second thing that I was really interested in finding out was, how is this behaviour carried out? What are the different strategies that people seem to use, or that they are accused of using when they are sort of apparently trolling? And then the third thing I'll go on to is the ESRC project. So, definitions. What does this word trolling mean? The problem at the moment is trolling is being used to mean everything from an annoying insult, even someone disagreeing with you, right through to really horrific threats of rape and abduction. If we look in the media recently with the Caroline Criado Perez case, she campaigned to have a woman put on a banknote, and she received these horrific threats of rape and death. So we have this real problem that this word is being used to mean all kinds of different things. My solution was essentially to go into the data that I had, these sort of 80 odd million words that I collected, and to look at every single instance of how trolling was being discussed and to try and synthesize a general definition of this behaviour. When you do that, you end up coming up with a much broader definition rather than a very narrow or a specific one, but that sort of gives you somewhere to start with, rather than, for instance, just going to a newspaper and taking their definition or just picking one user and choosing theirs. You kind of need to have one that's going to represent as much of the data as possible, but that isn't so vague that it's useless. One of the things that is a real issue that spins off from this is when we are looking particularly at criminal cases, really extreme cases of death threats, rape threats, bomb threats, when you don't have a good, robust definition, it becomes much more difficult to prosecute a behaviour. So the issue that sort of spins off from this is without a really good, clear definition of trolling as a behaviour, it becomes difficult to prosecute in court. And so, of course, you need somewhere that sort of gives you this definition to work with, whether that's the Crown Prosecution Service or Ofcom or whichever kind of regulatory body. As and when someone does come around to coming up with this definition, they may decide that trolling doesn't mean that really extreme stuff, the really horrible behaviours. They may use a different term for that, like cyberstalking. But at this time, as I was sort of saying, we just don't have that definition to work with. So another issue that came up was when I was trying to come up with this definition, another place I obviously looked through was all of the literature, the research that is available, and I found a really hard time basically making trolling fit in with a lot of the research. There's a whole body of research on an area called impoliteness within pragmatics, which is situated within linguistics, and that even definitions of what is considered impolite or rude don't fit with trolling as well, particularly because of the deceptive and manipulative nature of trolling. So, given that I couldn't really find any good definitions from academia, I tried reference works, dictionaries and so forth, but you tend to find that those definitions are very short, they're decontextualised, and sometimes they contradict each other as well. I also looked in legislation, but I couldn't find any UK or US definitions for this kind of behaviour. And of course, when you go online, you find lots of definitions in the media, you find lots of definitions online, but you get a lot of contradiction there as well. So, the next issue that I went on to in my 2013 article was this issue of strategies. How do people go about trolling, or how are they accused of having gone about trolling? Having gone through approximately 3,700 cases or examples of trolling in the data, I came up with roughly 6 strategies. I sort of tried to code each example, what seems to be the main thing that this person is being accused of doing. What you have to be very careful about with that, though, is that this was a really specific type of data. It's Usenet, it's from a very specific era, so it's from 2005 to 2011. It's from 2 very specific groups, so it's from a horse group, no surprise, and from a football group. So you can't say that just because I found these 6 strategies that this will represent all trolling on the internet everywhere. These are just the ones that I found in my data, and there's some unusual differences that I'll point out in a minute. So one of the first strategies I found was the digression strategy. So you go onto a horse board and you start talking about something totally irrelevant or different, like computers or whatever, particularly if the group is, shall we say, more tending towards the controversial. So for instance, joining a Darwin science group and then telling those people to find Jesus, you can imagine how that's going to be much more controversial. Hypocriticism seemed to be a really common strategy. So a really classic one was that someone would post a really long and complex and in-depth answer, and they would put a lot of effort into it, and then someone would respond simply with, you apostrophised incorrectly, or you spelt this word wrong, and particularly if in that critical post they themselves made some kind of punctuation or typographic error. A third strategy was antipathy, which was essentially sort of positioning oneself against the group. So if it's a horse group, you would join and say that horses are rubbish and expensive, and why do you bother with them? A fourth strategy, and this is where we start moving towards potentially criminal behaviours, is the endangerment strategy. So people would put forward dangerous suggestions under the sort of illusion that they were sincere, that, you know, people should really try this. So someone would post, for instance, my computer's broken, what should I do to fix it? And someone else would say, get a really strong magnet and wave it near the hard drive, and that will help to realign whatever. And of course, actually doing that will wipe the hard drive and damage the computer beyond repair. So they would give advice, or they would present scenarios that were actually endangering or stupid or cruel. Shock strategy, this is one that we see in the media a great deal at the moment. The classic example is that someone loses a child in very tragic circumstances, that a tribute page is set up typically on Facebook, and then individuals will go to that tribute page and they will post really offensive things like "your child deserved to die," and they would post jokes and things like this. It's referred to in the media as RIP or memorial trolling. And then the final one, the aggress strategy, was essentially the really sort of on record, unmitigated, "I hate you, you're horrible, I'm coming to kill you, you deserve to be shot," really extreme things like that. Now, what's interesting in the data that I used for my PhD particularly is that this strategy was very, very rare. I probably found 3 or 4 examples of it, and even those examples aren't particularly brilliant. And this takes us into the ESRC project that I'm going to talk about next. So in September of 2013, this year, I basically put in a bid for an ESRC urgency grant for approximately £200,000. And the idea was that we were going to investigate the rape threats and death threats that had been sent to a number of high-profile women, including Caroline Criado Perez, who is a journalist, and Stella Creasy, who is an MP. The threats that they received were, in amongst many others, they were extremely misogynistic, very violent, very aggressive. Now, what was really interesting for me right from the beginning was how the media immediately called that trolling, and how that kind of behaviour, that really extreme, aggressive, threatening behaviour, was extremely predominant, whereas in my PhD data, the aggress strategy had been very, very rare. So basically, we put together this project idea, and it's sort of got 3 major issues that we're going to look at. The first question that we're seeking to answer is, what can we learn about these kinds of individuals who send these kinds of threats? So when they're busily constructing a public identity, what kind of identity are they trying to construct? What do their concerns or interests seem to be? Do they sort of try and give an idea of a role in society, or do they try and self-justify their particular behaviours? Do they differ from others who engage in different types of disruptive behaviour, or do they seem to follow similar patterns? The second question that we were going to address, or that we are going to address, is why do they make these kinds of threats? Why do they make rape threats or extremely violent threats? So what can we learn about the social context of their actions and their motivations for behaving in this way? Can we sort of identify particular triggers or what have you? And also, what do they seem to want to gain or to achieve as a result of the reactions to their threats? What is it they seem to be trying to get to or trying to achieve? The third question that we're also really interested in is, what else do these individuals do? Apart from just sending rape threats, do they send other kinds of malicious or hate speech communications? Do they, for instance, do they send things that are homophobic, that are racist, that are against certain religions? Do they engage in other kinds of negatively marked behaviours like cyberstalking? And also, what kind of networks do they form? Are these individuals acting by themselves, or are they part of much broader networks where there are maybe dozens of people acting in concert, all doing the same kind of thing? So we do know already, just from the research, for instance, that there are certain motives to answer one of these questions. We do know that there are certain encouragements, if you like, towards online aggressive behaviour, so that we know, for instance, that humans really enjoy consuming aggression. If you only look at our entertainment industry, you can see, for a start, violent films, the types of fiction that we consume, the type of video games that we buy. As a species, we really enjoy aggression, the consumption of aggression. We also know that online competition is really polarising, so it pushes people to extremes, so that individuals start to compete with each other to see who can post the most extreme thing. And also, when they argue with others, when they come into conflict with others, we know that that pushes them to a greater extreme than they would actually take up face to face. We know also that the anonymity of the internet can really encourage disinhibition. It can make people think that it's okay to act in really extreme kinds of ways. And we know that it makes individuals feel much safer from consequence. So they may feel safe because of the numbers that they are acting in, that there are 50 of us and only one of you. They may feel that the invisibility protects them, that the police just don't care, that the police are sort of apathetic about this and won't do anything. We also know, as a third point, that it's much easier to be empathetically divorced from people online because it's just a computer screen and it's just words, it's not a human being. It's much easier to pretend that the other person isn't a human being, that they don't have feelings, and that in turn makes it easier to blame the victim. For instance, you put this online, you deserved it, you engaged in this campaign to have a woman put on a banknote, you deserve the response. You put yourself in public, then you deserve to be held to account is often the phrase that's used. And at the same time, it's also easy for that individual to diminish the offence in themselves, to say, for instance, well, I didn't really mean it. It wasn't real. I wasn't really going to find and do these horrific things. I was obviously joking and he or she obviously took it far too seriously. It's just Twitter and it's not real. So these are the kinds of things that we'll be really interested in investigating in this Twitter project. So this ESRC project will run for 14 months. It starts on the 1st of December, and it runs all the way through till the end of 2014 or start of 2015. As soon as results start coming out from this, of course, we'll be posting them online and making them available in general. Thank you very much.